The other great use case for log shipping is disaster recovery. You can keep a standby database in another location that is typically not too far behind production. Instead of log shipping, you might think about using always-on availability groups instead. Log shipping doesn't have a failback like AG does, and AG will probably keep your database more up to date, and there are several other benefits. However, the skill set to set up availability groups is more advanced. In either case, you need to understand exactly what's needed to run the application that's pointing to your database. When the database fails over, you need to think about accounts, scheduled jobs, link servers, certificates, replication, the list goes on. If the day ever comes that you have to actually fail over, you should have everything documented so you don't have to think about what to do next. This also means that you should test everything on a periodic basis. As you saw in the last video, a critical aspect of failing over is making sure that you have all the log file backups. In a disaster situation, you may not be able to recover all the transactions that happen right before the disaster. If the issue is at the database level, for example, the database will not come online, you might be able to run one last transaction log backup with the no truncate option. If the problem is with the SQL server and the SQL server will not come online, you will just have to make sure that any existing transaction log backups have been restored in the standby. In the case of the server itself being offline or the data center being offline, there's a chance you will not be able to grab any last backups off that server. Of course, failing over is not something to consider lightly. I'm remote controlling Client 1, and I'm connected to the two instances involved with log shipping in SSMS. Notice that the source database is in recovery pending mode. That's not good. The last time I ran a query against it, there were 5 rows in the test table. I'll go ahead and check the destination database and see how many rows. There are only 4 rows. I'll switch over to SQL Backup, and I see that the source database shows up as suspect. I'll refresh just to make sure that's accurate. There are no log files waiting to be copied over to the share, and there are no log files waiting there either. I'll go back to SSMS. I have the log shipping jobs disabled just for the purposes of this demo. I'll double-click the backup job, click Steps, and double-click the step to bring up the properties. I'll select the command and copy it. I'll cancel out of these dialogues and open a new query window. I'll just close this one to get it out of the way, and I'll paste in the command. I need to scroll over to the end of the command and add one more option at the end. Comma, space, no, underscore, truncate. This will allow me to take a log tail backup, even though the database is not available. I'll run the command, and it says that it failed, but let's take a look at the Results tab. On the Results tab, you can see that the backup actually was successful, but because the database is not available, it shows as an overall failure. The other thing to note here is that the backup file will not be copied to the share. I'll make a note of the backup name. It ends in 5252. And let's take a look at the backup folder over on SQL 1. There's the file that I need. I'll right-click and copy it, and then paste it over on the share. Now try to run the restore job. It succeeds, so I'll close this. Now I'll run the select statement again to see if it picked up that extra row. And there are 5 rows. Another thing to note, since I manually copied that file over to the share, it still may be there. You may have to move it yourself to where it needs to go on SQL 2. Now that the database is caught up, or at least as much as possible depending on the situation, I can run the restore command to recover it. After typing it in, I'll run it. And now I'll refresh the database folder. The database is now ready. I didn't address the user accounts in this video, so take a look at the Failover for Migration demo class. In the log shipping module, you first learned about log shipping fundamentals, just what it all means. Then I covered the prerequisites, so you know what you have to have in place before you run the log shipping wizard. You then learned how to set up log shipping and how to test it to make sure that it's working. I covered a couple of issues that might come up and how to troubleshoot them, and finally, I showed you how to fail over.